Welcome back to BAS 121. We're going to go through Chapter 11, which is a very interesting chapter. So up until now, we've been talking about how to forecast or project a value for the future. But very rarely, like if business people are talking about future revenues, very rarely do they say our revenue for next year is going to be one specific number. Normally they talk in terms of ranges and they look at simulation and risk analysis and try to understand what top three events cause the most risk to my business or to my projection. So running some simulations and doing some risk analysis is very important on any forecast because it gives you a sense of how much risk do I really have. And then it also was the sensitivity analysis will tell you what two or three things do I have to focus on the most to make sure that I achieve my forecast. So we'll show you how to do simulation and risk in Excel. And the way we'll do that is we'll generate a random number and then we will apply a distribution, a probability distribution, and then we'll let the random number generator generate a random number in that probability, and we'll put it into our spreadsheet, and we'll show you how to do that. Then what we'll do is we'll do what's called Monte Carlo simulations using our frontline add-in analysis or risk solver, which will allow us to do it automatically and gives us much more flexibility than perhaps Excel does. It's not quite as cumbersome, but not everybody's going to have frontline add-in. So we're going to show you both ways, both with Excel and with frontline. And then once we get frontline in place, we're going to show you examples probably in the other videos of 4 different models. A new product introduction model, news vendor, which as you remember was our candy store where we're looking at different quantities, the overbooking of a hotel or motel or airlines, lots of overbooking situations, and then most everybody's going to do a cash budgeting process. So this whole chapter is about risk in simulations, and the reason that's important is if you go into a manager and you say revenue next year is 11,132 is what I project, the next question is most likely going to be, well, how much risk is there to that? Or what's the range around that number? And oh, by the way, what are the 3 most critical factors I need to worry about? Is it supplier cost? Is it labor cost? What factors in your equation are going to drive the most risk or drive the most potential? So anytime you give a forecast, you're going to want to not only just give the numbers, but you're going to context it with the simulation and risk around those numbers, which is what this chapter is intended to provide you. So we're going to take a look at simulation risk. We're going to talk models that include randomness. We're going to do, and that's the way most of the world is. So then we're going to take these models to help evaluate the risk. And again, risk is simply the probability of occurrence of an undesirable outcome. We're going to do some risk analysis to see, as I said earlier, which ones have the largest potential. And potential, is it my labor costs that are going to have the highest impact? Is it my cost of advertising that's going to have the highest impact? Oftentimes what people do is they say, hey, if there's a 10% change in this variable, what percent change does that do to my predictor variable? So if I'm predicting earnings, if there's a 10% increase in labor costs, what percentage impact does that impact my earnings? If it impacts my earnings by 50%, then management knows that that's a very critical element. If it impacts my earnings by 1%, then it's not such a critical value. And then we'll run simulations which you can generate hundreds and thousands of different scenarios, and then you can say to the boss, there's a 70% chance that this thing will be successful because I've run several simulations. So let's get into an example and show you in Excel. So if you open up the outsourcing decision model, and I'm going to do this a little bit differently now. I'm going to actually show you. I'm going to go to the outsourcing decision model and show you what I did. And let me move my guy over a little bit so you can actually see this. Okay, there's our decision-making model right there. Remember, we had our fixed costs, our variable costs, and you can follow along here in the Excel file. And this is how it's all set up. And notice they put in this cell this round norm INV random, very complicated formula. And if you're like me, you're saying, what's going on here? So what I did down here for you is I said, well, let's talk about what's going on here. So what's going on, if you take any equation, you go from inside out. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to generate a random number. Well, the way you do that is, if you remember in Excel, is you say RAND function, 2 parentheses, and it's going to generate a random number someplace between 0 and 1, which is okay, because now what we're going to do is we're going to say, let's assign a distribution to that. Okay? The way we do that is we go norm, and Excel changes. I think the textbook has a little later version with the period. You go norm INV, which, if you remember, says, if you give me a probability, I'll tell you where that is on the distribution. Well, what we did by generating a random number between 0 and 1 is we basically generated a random probability, which is great, right? Between 0 and 1, because remember, our probabilities are between 0 and 1. So what I did here is I said, tell me if the probability is whatever random number generator I generated. So in this case, it's 0.29 or 29%. And then I say I want it between, my distribution, I want it with a mean of 1,000 and a standard deviation of 100. So will you tell me that number? And there it is. It's 972.45, on and on and on. Then all this last thing does is say, hey, whatever number you came up with up there, would you please round it for me? Round it to 0 digits, because my production volume's never fractions of a unit. So this equation up here, and then I just said add it right there. And then up here in this part, I put the complicated formula. Round norm INV 1 to 1,000, right? So there's the formula. What it's doing again, I broke it down for you. It's generating a random number. Then once between 0 and 1. Then it says, all right, norm INV, give me the probability of that, the probability and the number. If I have a probability here with a mean of 1,000 and a standard deviation of 100, that gets me that number, and then I round it to the nearest one. Okay? Now, over here, let me see if I can scoot over so you see the rest of it. Okay, then over here on this side, we generated a table, a decision table. So I took my trials and I went, let's do 20 trials. My demand was simply from my production volume, so it was B12. My cost difference was right here. The cost difference was B19. And the decision I just copied from here once I had it. Then what I did is I went up to my bar. Let me make sure you can see all this. Then I went up here and I said data. Well, first thing I did is I highlighted my area. And I said data, what if, data table. I didn't need any rows, just put one there. And this may or may not, probably won't work because I already have a data table there. Once you have the data table set up, you can then just simply hit your F9, different simulations for you. So you can see from here, we can then calculate what percentage of the time was the decision to manufacture, what percentage of the time was the decision to outsource. I'm not going to calculate here, but eyeballing it, it looks like it's about 45% of the time we manufacture, 55% of the time we outsource. Now, what this does for you is if outsourcing is a very risky scenario, for example, we're going to a different country or something like that, management might very well say, unless the decision is really, really weighed towards outsourcing, I don't want to do it because it has too much risk. So, going back to, we've gone in here, I've shown you in Excel how we went ahead and made this equation. You can run several simulations by copying over, or you can do what we did. You can create a data table, which I'll show you right here, where we just created the data table in Excel by setting up our trials, setting up demand, cost differences, and what the decision would be. And there's the table that they generated. And there they did, well, look at this. Their guess, 55% outsourcing, so they came up with pretty much the same results we did. As I said, F9 will give you a different scenario, so you could run 300 if the boss wanted to, very quickly. Second scenario might give you a slightly different answer because they're all random generators. So now the next video we're going to talk about, that's how to do it in Excel. The next video we'll talk about, well, how do we do it if we want to do simulations using the RiskSolver platform? Any questions? Let me know.